Hello, my name is Matthew Ferry. I am from RVU. It is just an acronym. It doesn't actually stand for anything, so I apologize if you were wondering. I'm the data product manager for RVU, and so that is a role that is pretty new to us. We just established a data team. We have a head of data and analytics, myself as a data product manager, and we're actively looking for data engineers. So if you were one of those, come see me after the show. So today I want to talk to you about how not to talk about DBT. And this is something that we've learned through a series of months of just figuring out, like, I guess, how to talk about it, and then realizing that we weren't doing it right. So essentially, before I get into that, I did actually have a thing. So when I was in university, I took a class on financial derivatives. And as part of that class, you're supposed to trade a portfolio for the entirety of the semester. But every class, I learned something that scared me so badly about the stock market that I only ever made one trade in the entirety of the semester. And then at the end, I had to write a 10-page paper about that portfolio. And this presentation feels a little bit like that paper in the sense of we've been working on this since the first DBT meetup, and we're still working on our first team. And I think that's an important thing to talk about. I don't think that we tend to talk about places where we haven't been a wild success, and so that's kind of what I want to share with you today. So a little bit of background about RVU. RVU is the team behind three pretty popular, or we hope very popular websites. Last month we saw about 5 million users across our three websites, the first of which is USwitch, probably the one that you're most likely to hear of. We are an energy comparison website that also does comparisons for all sorts of home services and financial services, such as broadband or mobile phone deals. And our second website is money.co.uk. This is primarily a comparison site also for financial services. And then thirdly, we also have a third brand that we're bringing over from the US called Bankrate. So Bankrate.com is a big player in the mortgage space, and we're trying to kind of change the way that customers are engaging with the mortgage getting process. So those are our three websites, and we're trying to pull all kinds of data from all these different users and put that into one place. So how do we do that? We're using a bunch of sort of off-the-shelf tools to do some of those things, as well as things that we've built internally. So just to walk you through this, like, we're primarily trying to think about the performance of this website and how it's serving our customers. So we're going to need to understand both their behavior on site and the sort of event data that comes out of that, which we get through Google Analytics and more recently through Segment. And then also the paid and earned media performance that we're pulling in from, like, AdWords, Twitter, Facebook, any of those other sources. And so for that, we're using a company called Fivetran that will allow us to just pull that data straight from the API and dump it into BigQuery, which is our data warehouse. But that's not the only information that we're interested in about our business. So there's lots of internal databases that we're going to need to take information out of and then replicate it into the same place as this very juicy up funnel and middle of funnel data. So for transitioning that data out of internal databases and into BigQuery, we have two different tools that we're using. One is called Beetle. It's an internally built tool that is essentially a command line tool built in Haskell that allows you to use SQL and YAML files to define the transformations of your data. Sounds a little bit like DBT, but we'll get to that in a minute. The second thing that we're also using is Databricks for a couple of our processes. Databricks is a hosted, a managed Spark platform for doing all kinds of Scala and Python-based transformations. So with that, it's probably worth talking about the team structure a little bit so you can get a background for what we're about to talk through. Essentially, we've got roughly 5 different teams. That might be a simplification, but we're thinking about our teams in terms of the products that we're serving to users, and not really as much about those 3 different brands that we talked about. So each team is cross-functional, including a marketing team, a product team, an engineering team, and an analytics team, as well as a commercial team, commercial team, I just forgot to put that on the slide. It's true. And across all of those teams, each of them has their own analyst team, ranging from 1 to 6 analysts, and the total comes in at about 16, I think. So all of these teams have some element of their reporting coming through BigQuery, but not necessarily all of it. I think energy is the one that has the least of their data through BigQuery, but then the rest of it is coming in through nearly all or most or all of their reports. So in addition to this sort of SQL-based world, we don't really have a BI tool that's sitting on top of this that's like giving self-service data so much as we have Tableau, where our analysts are creating dashboards for business users to come in and pull data, analyze data, find trends, all that sort of thing. So within this, we've got about 130 registered users to Tableau. I can't guarantee that all of them are actually looking at it, but that is the number that we've got. So that gives you hopefully roughly a scope of maybe 10% of our business is analysts, and they're the ones who are going to be using SQL. The rest of our business is going to be a little bit less SQL-based, and is primarily going to be using Tableau and these data sets and potentially spreadsheets. So, but within these analyst teams, we have one of what I think Fishtown Analytics would call an analytics engineer. If you're not familiar with the term of analytics engineer, it's essentially an analyst who has moved towards the curation of data and tried to adapt software engineering best practices to the way that they do that. And so each one of these teams has at least one analyst who has experience with a command line, has experience with Git, really knows their SQL and knows the data behind their business and can transform it appropriately. And they also know how to use this tool internally called Beetle, which is essentially using these YAML files to define the order of transformations and the SQL to define the transformation that they're doing. So you would think that that sets you up really, really well to just say, like, let's pull that thing out, swap in DBT, and we'll do all the transformations that happen within BigQuery. And you would think, like, oh yeah, perfect, done, deal, we're going to go home. Actually, it's not quite that easy. So there is some additional technical knowledge that you need as an analyst to understand, like the Jinja SQL and the templating and the modular components and how to really architect that system. And I think we did initially see some pushback from engineers who were like, well, I think we're going to have to teach people a lot about how to construct these modular components and how they should fit together. And I don't think that, honestly, we've even gotten to the point where I have a great story for you about how we've done that. But I think where we are right now is saying, like, oh, okay, theoretically, it's not so much a technical skill gap to get started, at least with understanding what the tool does and what it's trying to do. But there's something else that's sort of preventing us from going. Maybe it's a lack of knowledge. Maybe people haven't seen this thing. So the way that we decided to go about this was, let's find one place that's really good for us, or really important, or doesn't really have a lot of data set up, and we'll go do a proof of concept there. And so that's what we did. We started out with our SEO team, which you remember only had one analyst, but also a really important part of our business, considering that all of our users are coming to our website. That's really the only way that we continue to have a nice building like this and can host DBT meetups and make cookies. So the thought behind this was, let's kind of launch this big effort in SEO. We'll curate a bunch of their data. We'll embed somebody who is familiar with DBT, and we'll kind of build out this proof of concept. But the thing is, as soon as you sign on to doing a very important and big project, big and important projects always have deadlines. And there's always something that is going to come up where you need to make sure that you get this done fast. And the nice thing about using DBT was, yes, we did hit all of those deadlines. We were able to make the reporting that we needed. We were able to grow the business in the ways that we wanted to. But at the same time, we didn't really turn it into the proof of concept that we were thinking about. When we started, we said, DBT as a proof of concept has a bunch of things that we like. We like documentation, we like tests, we like the automation, we like the modular components, we like the collaboration, we love the lineage graphs, we love that we can just send this like HTML document to anybody and they'll be able to understand our transformations. But if you're moving as fast as possible, that's what you're seeing from the inside because you understand that vision, but people outside might not see that in the same way. They're only going to see what's in the repo and only see the things that you're sharing with them. And so that's why I want to talk about some of the opportunities that we had when we rolled out that initial prototype. Because as you can see, just looking at one of our models folders, or the top models folder, this is from July, you can see that it's incredibly flat and it's kind of intimidating. It's a little bit overwhelming when you're giving that first impression to somebody of like, what is it that you're doing with DBT? Because I want to go into this repo, I'm going to try and like look through the different things. If I understand what the models are, I'll try and dive in there. But now I've just got like dozens of different models that I'm trying to understand, and it's not clear what the hierarchy of these things is. And I think if I go back to that, to Stephen Whitworth's talk from the last DBT meetup, he talked a lot about the importance of the first impression and the technical work that he was doing to make a good first impression at Monzo. And I think for us, this was sort of something that internally we were thinking like, oh, this is great, we're moving so fast. But externally, it might have been like, well, but like, I can't really understand this necessarily. I'm not dead sure how you structured this. I'm not. So anyway. So the second thing was the documentation. We knew that we were really excited about documentation as a concept, and we could generate the docs, but the way that we had set it up, initially, honestly, we were running it ourselves to do those transformations. Then finally we get it scheduled, but then there's a question of, okay, how do I host that documentation? Sure, I can host it the first time. It's very easy to host it once. But then every time I make a change to that code, I have to update that hosting. Now I need an engineer to help me do that. And I just told you when I showed you the side of the SEO team, it's just marketing teams and analysts. There's nobody who's engineering to be able to help us do this. But in our head, we already know. We know that documentation is the way forward. We know that DBT makes that super easy. And so in our head, still great. But in reality, when you look at this, it's like, okay, we haven't tagged these things necessarily. We don't have a description on here. We don't have descriptions on the columns. And so when somebody looks at this, they're still not really sure what they're looking at. But it almost takes like an outside eye to see that. And the third thing that you'll notice is, so I already mentioned that generating it super easy. You just run the command, but then once you host it, it comes with its own complications. I think the third thing was the tests. You can also see in this that we weren't running tests really, because we were moving very fast. We got the things out the door. We knew that tests were in the future, and we didn't necessarily have to tell everybody, like, hey, we're going to do testing, we're going to do all this stuff, and then show them all the tests, because we know that, right? You guys know that. So, and this is really the fundamental difference that I want to talk about today, which is like, how does a newcomer see what you're doing versus how do you see what you're doing? And I think one of the questions that we would get a lot is like, why can't we use this old tool? Why can't we use Beetle? It does SQL, it does the YAML stuff. We can add in, like, it was in-house, so we could build in the dependency features. That was what we were excited about. We can add in documentation. Like, why do we need to move to this tool to be able to do those things? But internally, we're thinking, like, we're using the thing. Like, welcome to the year 3000. We've got DBT going. And that was kind of, it took some time to realize the disparity there. The second thing was, like, looking in this repo, if I'm familiar with what a Beetle repo looks like, and I understand that, I look in this one, I don't understand what it is. But at the same time, for us, we're like, this lets us do so much modular stuff. We can build so many things so quickly. Look at how great, like, this stuff is, and we're excited about it. We're servicing the need that the SEO team has to build all of their data with this new tool. So for us, it's a success, but when you look externally and you try to decide, do I want to move on to this? It's kind of questionable. And the third thing is, from externally, even though I can generate docs and then have it on my machine and send it to anybody who asks me, people aren't just going to ask me, like, hey, can you send me this HTML file that you generate that's really pretty? There's no way that I am necessarily promoting that unless I'm actively promoting, this is where the documentation is, this is how you learn about this stuff. And also, additionally, making sure that people are actually using those data sets that you're building to understand the value of the additional stuff that you've built around it. Because if it's just that marketing team and the SEO team and one analyst, that's not really the expansion and scope that we need for people to feel like this is, we've sort of created an avalanche and people are going to move on to this. And then the fourth thing is, like, nobody was thinking about tests before we launched it. So when we launched it without tests, nobody was going to call us out on that. But that was a big thing of what we wanted to do this for. So we have to follow our own best practices to be able to get there, and that can be kind of a bitter pill to swallow. If you want to meet that deadline, it's like, okay, do I write the test, so on. And like, the difference between these two things, if I can go back for a second, the difference between these two things isn't agreement on whether or not we should launch DBT. It's agreement on whether or not the thing that I'm asking for is valuable. The thing that I'm asking for is we should be doing documentation. We should be building reusable code that other people are collaborating on. We should be writing tests against all of these things. Those are fundamental cultural shifts between inside of our believers bubble and outside that we have to be clear about and be distinct about. And that's the point of this talk, is that we often use a new technology, not just DBT, but really any piece of technology, to be a catalyst for cultural change that we want to enact with the organization. I've done this a lot. I've done this with different tracking technologies. When I was starting to roll out Segment, I was like, this is going to be a catalyst for change. Like, this is going to be the way that we do all these things. But the tool is not really the change. these are two different things. There's a cultural change that I have to enact of I have to have people expect that we have tests on these things. I have to expect documentation. That has to be like a thing that everyone is clamoring about. Otherwise, we're just moving to a new technology and we're not making the change that we wanted. So sometimes you'll roll out a technology and you'll look back at it and say, like, I have done the thing that I set out to do technically, but it's not necessarily the way that I wanted it to happen. And so this is the thing that I want to call out. If you're looking at a logo like this, it's easy to say like that this is the thing, like DBT will be the change that we do or that we have here, but that's not really the truth. What I want to call out is like you are the cultural change. And I'm going to reference Stephen's talk again. He talks about 80% of his time he was hoping to spend on communication, 20% of his time he was hoping to spend on technical work. And I think for me, I translate that as 80% of my time should be enacting the cultural change that I'm trying to enact, and then 20% of my time should be doing technical work to facilitate those things. And so when I said there's a way to not talk about DBT, this is what I want to talk about. The way that we were talking about it, that I was talking about it, was if we use DBT, we're going to get tests on everything. If we use DBT, we'll get documentation that everybody can read and use. But really, this is me projecting that the tool is a panacea that's going to fix a lot of my problems and my own workflow problems and things that I'm not doing well. And then I'm saying that my vision is the thing that it will bring. It's not actually, those two things are not actually related necessarily. This is one way that we could use DBT, but it's not necessarily the way that you have to. And I think the second way that I'm trying to start talking about this is to say, if we put tests on everything, we'll have confidence in our data. DBT makes that easier. DBT is not the thing that's doing it, it's just a facilitator to help us. So this is the bitter pill that we're swallowing. We have to put tests on everything. That's going to be somewhat time consuming, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but we'll have confidence in our data. If I can sell that value, and I say this bitter pill is worth the value, then I can say, okay, the way that I'm going to make that easier is by creating this technical tool or all sorts of things around DBT to make that easy for you. So this is the thing that you're connecting there. You can take away DBT, you can take away whatever tool you're talking about. If you can connect the vision to the value that you're creating, then that is a reasonable way to be talking about this thing. Okay, so what I want to do now is kind of talk you through the ways that we've changed our approach since we made this realization and some of the things that we're doing to try and make this rollout a little bit more tangible for people. And hopefully if you've empathized with anything that I've said about the challenges that we faced or the things that we thought, what we think are easy mistakes to make, then some of this will be relevant for the technical way that you can overcome some of these challenges and better associate your vision with the value. So the first one is that rather than running this ourselves, we've actually gone with a paid solution with, just a disclaimer there, a paid solution with DBT or with Fishtown Analytics called DBT Cloud. So this generates yet another beautiful looking UI that I can put in front of people that also provides scheduling. So this is an example of a run that we did where it gives me a really clear indicator of whether or not the run has succeeded. That's inclusive of any of the warning and error metrics that you would get. And I can have an analyst who has full access to this, who can go in and say, did my SEO data run today? Okay, yes it did. This is the time that it ran at. This is how long all of these models took to run. And if it's not running or something's going wrong, I can click rerun now and just rerun all of that. So rather than having the sort of a little bit more developer-centric Kubernetes hosting that we had, where you had to go in and force some cron job to run based on the command line, that's not something that all of my SEO team is going to be able to do. And if they could do it, great for them. But this is much easier and gives confidence to senior leadership that their analysts know what is going on with their data. So the second thing that we're doing, we do actually have an idle TV standby. Okay. So the second thing that we're doing is really doubling down on the documentation that we've been talking about and making ourselves follow that our own best practice to see if it works. Because what I want to know is, like, if I do this, is it so much of a pain that I don't want to do it? And if I don't want to do it, am I going to force somebody else to do it? This should help me find the happy medium between everything is documented and everything is beautiful and you've got a bunch of stuff around it and the thing that is actually reasonable for me. So what you can see here is that we do actually have descriptions, we have the details and the tags, we also have our columns documented, and that stuff gets written into BigQuery, which is really nice. Additionally, this is another part of dbt Cloud, which is that every time I run a run of dbt, I can generate new documentation so that if the GitHub repository updates at any point, then new docs are generated and I can share those again. And so, again, all hosted for me so I don't have to think about that nearly as hard as I was having to before. So the third thing is that you will actually see tests on this table. Very proud of that. We're trying to follow all of those best practices that we talked about so that once we do them, we can find the value in them and point to situations where having those tests or having that documentation was really useful for not just us, but for other people. And then we can say this is actually not a prototype, but a proof of concept. Because the concept that we wanted to prove was documentation is important. We wanted to prove that testing was important. We wanted to improve that better insight into these things and making it approachable was also important. And so if we have a prototype that does those things, I would call that a real proof of concept. So in closing, talk about dbt like this, not like this. Okay. So thank you. My name is Matthew Ferry. I'll be here all night and probably all week.